So, I got invited to the closed beta test for Ubisoft's XDefiant, but before I go talking about my thoughts on the game proper, I feel like I have to explain my stance on Ubisoft as a whole because it does influence how I see and evaluate Ubisoft games a whole lot. Now, this may seem harsh, but I believe that Ubisoft as a company are the king of mid. I think Ubisoft are their own worst enemies. I think Ubisoft as a company as a whole has the unique talent of coming up with the most interesting and the most fantastic ideas for games, which they then absolutely squander by making the most bland, soulless, repetitive, exhausting, and worst of all, most boring kind of game out of those ideas. I mean, honestly, it takes a special type of talent to do that consistently and repeatedly for almost a decade now. Games like For Honor, like The Division, Ghost Recon, all these games they have a lot of potential, but they get marred with all sorts of issues that can ultimately be boiled down to Ubisoft being Ubisoft. And then beyond that, there's stuff like Far Cry and Assassin's Creed where it's so formulaic, repetitive, and padded to the brim with time wasters that want you to buy these time skip tokens that finishing the game just feels exhausting. I'm of the opinion that Ubisoft is only coasting along thanks to its legacy big name IPs. I mean, let's be serious here. Let's take a step back and look at it, right? When was the last time you were hyped to hear anything about Phoenix Rising and The Crew? Yeah, I thought so. If Ubisoft can't tack on the Far Cry or Assassin's Creed or Tom Clancy brand on it, there's honestly zero guarantee that the game is sticking around beyond year 1 or 2. Now, getting back to the topic, XDefiant was almost very nearly that kind of game. When announced, the game was originally going to carry the Tom Clancy brand name. Now, Tom Clancy fans were not happy with it. Turns out when your franchise is historically composed of more serious, gritty, slow-paced tactical games, pitching what amounts to Call of Duty with a punk rock aesthetic is going to fly about as well as the Soviet Pacific Admiralty. The reactions were made even worse considering this was announced after Ghost Recon Breakpoint launched to honestly horrendous reception, and this was also announced around the same time as that Ghost Recon Battle Royale that I honestly haven't heard of from since last year, so it's probably pretty sure that got canned a while ago. So anyways, all this backlash, well, it made Ubisoft announce that they'd be dropping the Tom Clancy tag from the game and that it would simply be called XDefiant. Now, despite hearing all what I've said, and despite all the initial flack that XDefiant caught early on, I wasn't actually quick to dismiss it. It had been a while since we had a good Call of Duty clone, and given how bloated and unoptimized Call of Duty games have become as of late, I wasn't entirely against the idea of getting a free-to-play alternative from another AAA company. So with that being said, what are my first impressions of XDefiant? Well, it's a game. Look, playing this game has neither underwhelmed nor overwhelmed me. I saw the trailers and some gameplay footage and went into the closed beta expecting the game to be a completely run-of-the-mill game, and you know what? The game met my expectations to the T. XDefiant is just another run-and-gun Call of Duty clone, complete with a pick 5 attachment system, loadouts, sprint and slide, 6v6 player matches, pre-game lobbies, 3-lane maps, battle passes, career unlocks, you know the deal. This has neither impressed nor has it disappointed me. XDefiant simply is. Now, some may say that this assessment isn't fair, that there's more to XDefiant than a mere Call of Duty clone, and that may very well be. There are several differences and gameplay variations that XDefiant does try to do, but I'm not quite sure it's enough to make it stand out among the sea of other Call of Duty clones or even from Call of Duty itself. This lack of differentiation is most emblematic in the faction system that the game tries to pull off. See, the faction system is supposed to be a way to break up the monotony of the average run-and-gun COD clone, but honestly all the faction system boils down to is having a handful of extra abilities to play around with. Each faction has 2 gadgets to choose from, and these vary from being very useful to being extremely situational. Given that these are on a cooldown even after you've been sent back to the spawn screen and maybe half a minute or so to cool down, it's an uphill battle to argue that they really make XDefiant stand out, especially when aiming down the sights and pumping the enemy full of lead often yields more immediate and reliable results. The balancing of these faction abilities are straight up all over the place. Cleaner abilities being significantly more situational, while echelon abilities are just useful all the time. Some of them make significant differences in firefights, others make about as much difference as voting for your preferred leader in North Korea. This could be something Ubisoft fixes before launch, but somehow I doubt that they'd be willing to rework factions so drastically. Still with the factions, and another issue that the faction system has that just really doesn't help it stand out more is that the faction operators honestly add nothing to the game save for being extra skins. These aren't even like the operators from the new Call of Duty games where each operator has voice lines which add personality to each match. Like sure, Adler and Woods both play the exact same in Cold War, but you get different voice lines from each which adds a different kind of flavor to your firefight, so while it's not mechanical, it feels different. Now, operators in XDefiant, they just don't do this. They're nothing more than empty shells. Nothing distinguishes them from each other aside from a quick lore blurb. Literally nothing. Like, even the voice lines they have, they're all so generic it's hard to tell which character it's coming from. You could just have generic skins for each faction and nothing would change. It's a superfluous feature in every sense of the word. Now, mind you, the faction system, it's not entirely bad. It's just that it feels both over-designed and unnecessary at the same time, which, in all honesty, is kind of impressive. I think I've ragged on the faction system for long enough, so let's move on to the other features. The gunplay is alright. There's really nothing I can say about it, bad or good. It works. Maybe the audio could be a bit beefier, maybe some of the animations could be crisper or reactive, the balancing could use a bit of tweaking, but they're certainly not bad. I can see where they're trying to go with this. It's just fine. Could be better, could be worse. There's really not a lot to say here. Now movement is an odd one. For the most part it works, and it works fine, but vaulting and clambering feels off. Not mechanically off, but like visually. It's too snappy. The camera jumps to the elevated position so quickly. It's hard to explain why, but it just doesn't feel right. I personally suspect it might be a quirk with the game engine. XDefiant runs on the Snowdrop engine, which was originally made for The Division. When you vault or clamber in The Division, the camera moves in a similar way. Now, I originally thought that the whole movement and the game overall was just The Division but bodged to work in first person, but after playing XDefiant a bit more, I was convinced otherwise. The part of movement that does give me a bit of a trouble is sliding. I'm still learning the ropes, but it can be pretty inconsistent. Sometimes I get the momentum of a fucking freight train and slide halfway across the map, other times I'm only sliding as far as the US Secretary of Labor in 1993 is tall. Now, I'm not quite sure if I'm doing something wrong or if the mechanics are bodged. We'll have to wait and see what the devs do with the game. Considering Ubisoft is apparently listening to self-proclaimed pro players who couldn't cut it for the Call of Duty League and had to settle for ruining other games. Well, I can't say I'm looking forward to the changes coming, but it is what it is. And honestly, I think that's my overall opinion on the game. I don't think it's bad, but I'm not sure it has a future. It might keep going for a bit, probably get some updates, but I think it's quite possible Ubisoft will axe it after year 2. I mean, Hyperscape, Breakpoint, Watch Dogs Legion, and Rainbow Six Extraction are all games that Ubisoft axed after a short while after launch. The company is clearly willing to cut its losses and move on if they think that a game just wasn't worth supporting anymore. XDefiant, unless it blows up and rakes in Call of Duty numbers, I just think it's inevitably going the same way as Breakpoint and Hyperscape. Now, this isn't me being overly negative or a doomer with Ubisoft or whatever. I'm just looking at the precedent set and then looking at the game as it stands. XDefiant just doesn't stand out or do anything special as a Call of Duty clone. The thing about being a clone game is that not only do you have to compete with the original as well as the games competing with the original, you also have to compete with the other clones as well as the other games competing with the clones. XDefiant might have a reasonably low entry barrier, being free to play and the system requirements being fairly low, but at that range you're now competing with more established games like Iron Sights or hell, Roblox Phantom Forces. You could argue that XDefiant is a AAA quality free-to-play first-person shooter and that's how it'll draw players, but now you've got Call of Duty's Warzone as a direct competitor, and a whole bunch of other free AAA FPS games muscling in on the same territory. You know, big games with strong followings, like Halo Infinite, Destiny 2, Overwatch 2, Valorant, and Counter-Strike. No matter which way you spin it, XDefiant is going to have a tough uphill battle, and I'm not sure it's a fight that Ubisoft is willing to persecute until it makes it to the top. To summarize, again, and I mean this as honestly and as sincerely as I can possibly be, the game isn't bad. I don't hate it. It's alright, it's serviceable, it's fun when it works. XDefiant could be a good or borderline great game given enough years, but with how crowded the free-to-play shooter market is, I can't confidently say Ubisoft won't kill it before then. Well, those are just about my thoughts on XDefiant, its closed beta, and its future overall. Now, I might take a look at it again when it launches proper, but it's probably going to take a whole lot of changes to really make me think that it's going to survive in the long term. Well, at least those are my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think about the game. Leave that in the comments down below, and that's gonna be all from me. If you like this video and you like my content, feel free to subscribe and hit the like button and, you know, all that bullshit. This has been Cheems of Regret, wishing you all good luck and Godspeed. See ya, guys!
Zone relocated. That's how Shadow Team does it.
Actually, scratch everything I've said in this entire video because I just found out the game punishes you for teabagging. You're not allowed to have fun in Ubisoft games. Yeah, there really is no hope for XDefiant. This is dead on arrival. GG.